Welcome back to the Elder Scrolls Lorecast Adventurers. I'm so bad at remembering to unmute myself after the intro sometimes. Hey, welcome. We're talking about the Wild Hunt today. We hinted at it last week. Well, we basically told you that's what we were going to talk about this week.
We hinted so strongly, we straight up told you.
We straight up told you. And not the Wild Hunt from The Witcher. We're not talking about weird,
good too.
evil elves from another dimension that come over and pretend to be spirits that abduct people and bring them back to their own dimension as slaves. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about those friendly little Bosmer guys going absolutely insane and doing
and not
things.
like a hyperbolic, like, oh, they're totally crazy. Just like it, like this is. We kind of made reference to the fact that this one actually, I would not suggest necessarily listening to the young ones. I mean, the show's got some, we don't overtly go explicit. This one's a little.
This is dark. This is dark in so like all the grossest ways.
Yeah, a little bit of viewer or listener discretion advised for this one, because this one's going to get a little funky.
Yeah, not funky like 70s dance party funky. Funky like Gut Gardens level of funky.
Yeah, Gut Gardens, and also it's actually it kind of makes the Gut Gardens in certain situations not look that bad.
Yeah, if the Gut Gardens are like a 10, this is like a 12.
Correct.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah. So let's get into this. And you know what? Before we get into the longer description, I'd like to just quote some of the things that we have documented in some of the books, because this has been fun. We've been going back to the books on a lot of these, and there are some of these books that get referenced and have been part of the series for a long time. So, for example, Varieties of Faith in the Empire. This is a book it showed up first in Morrowind. So it's been around for a while. This is not one of those books that was just written for Elder Scrolls Online. It shows up again in Skyrim. And there is a reference in here to the Wild Hunts, but we have to get down to the place where it mentions Jeffrey. Ifre. That's a callback. Classic Jeffrey. And so
Jeffrey, what are you doing?
In this document, it mentions all sorts of different gods from different pantheons. You've got people like Trinimac, but then you've got people like Tuwaka and people like Vivek, even, who some worshipped him like a god. He ascended to godhood on some level, right? At least for a time. And with Jeffrey, Ifre, if you haven't listened to the last episode, go back and listen to it. It's kind of a precursor to this episode. And
then you can proactively be mad at us again for saying Jeffrey.
Yes.
Jeffrey.
So Ifre, god of the forest, and this is the passage about Ifre, which we talked about last time. And this is kind of the connective tissue over to what we're talking about today with the Wild Hunt. Most important deity of the Bosmeri pantheon. Well, Ariel, Time Dragon, it actually says, while Ariel, Time Dragon, like that's his entire name, might be the king of the gods, the Bosmer revere Ifre as the spirit of the now. According to the Wood Elves, after the creation of the mortal plane, everything was in chaos. The first mortals were turning into plants and animals and back again. Then Ifre, and this is similar to what we talked about last time, then Ifre transformed himself into the first of the Elnofe. This is a very specific take on Ifre, which we didn't really get into this version of it last time, but
right.
The first of we talked about how he might be, or they might be associated with the Elnofe. The first of the Elnofe, or Earthbones, after these laws of nature were established, mortals had a semblance of safety in the new world because they could finally understand it. Ifre is sometimes called the storyteller for the lessons he taught the first Bosmer. Here we go. Some Bosmer still possess the knowledge of the chaos times, which they can use to great effect. And then it's in brackets, it says, the Wild Hunt. That's it. That's all this does. It doesn't tell you what is a wild hunt? What does that mean?
Super vague. Just here is a thing that exists. We have not really explained it yet.
Yeah. So, all right. So we've got another book from Morrowind that mentions the Wild Hunt, and it's a document called A Dance in Fire, Chapter 4 by Waffen Jarlth.
Just a note, because I love the fact that you specifically pulled this little excerpt for this episode, which I think will help. But if you have not, I strongly suggest, I think this is one of the best it's not a book, it's a series of books, there's several volumes.
They're actually pretty long compared to a lot of the books
this
that you get in these games, which are just like 3 pages.
This series as an encompassing full book, totally worth a read, but it is a full fleshed out story that you could like make a literal TV show out of. It's so involved. Like it is great. So do yourself a favor and read the entire thing, but the entire thing does not relate to the Wild Hunt. So just the excerpt you have is kind of what's relevant here, but it's definitely worth the read.
Right. So yeah. So and they're actually pretty long. There's a few different stories like this that are actually these longer series with multiple chapters, and you get you get the whole story. So this we just kind of cut into the chase here. It gets to a place where it says a flash of white fire erupted from every crevice in the temple, and the moan of the Bosmeri prayer changed into something terrible and otherworldly. The climbing Cathay-Rat, one of the Khajiit types of Khajiit, stopped and stared. Kirgo, it grasped, the Wild Hunt. It was as if a crack in reality had opened wide. A flood of horrific beasts, tentacled toads, insects of armor and spine, gelatinous serpents, vaporous beings with the face of gods all poured forth from the great hollow tree, blind with fury. They tore the Khajiit in front of the temple to pieces. All the other cats fled for the jungle. But as they did so, they began pulling on the ropes they carried. In a few seconds' time, the entire village of Vindisi was boiling with the lunatic apparitions of the Wild Hunt. That's a little bit more descriptive than the last one we got.
Yeah, I always kind of consider it of we were talking before the show about like weird, nerdy things. And the best description I've always thought, which I have no idea if it's actually, what the devs intend or the writers, but I always think, have you ever seen the really stupid movie Sharknado?
I have not watched it. But
all right,
I've heard of it. Sure.
I would say do yourself a favor and watch it, but probably don't.
Probably just to keep away still.
Yeah, but still don't worry about it. Just look at the cover art of it sometime, and I picture instead of Sharknado, it's just Bosmer, and like antlers. It's a spinning, just like if you take all of Bosmeri culture and you just jam it into a blender and you just spin it around really quick, you have this weird gray back to the ooze type of deal of just everything all at once turning into this just mess of chaos. And you would not want to be in the direct line of something like that. The way tornadoes lay waste to stuff, it seems like anything in the path of
especially when there's sharks involved.
Sure. Hey, where sharks? I mean, it's in the series.
Sure. Wait, so you're saying the Wild Hunt is the equivalent of the Sharknado?
I am.
It's the tamrielic equivalent.
It's the tamrielic version of a Sharknado. Yes. And it's really just like, it's one of those things that I feel, and we'll get into the fact that it's shown / referenced in ESO a bit. But I feel like it sounds so bizarre. It would be hard to properly do it justice in game. It's one of those things your imagination can always be more screwed up than what they can show, similar to with Vermina's Realm of Oblivion, where it's like, okay, how do you perpetually keep making something more nightmarish?
Or like the horror of it itself makes it hard to remember and reconcile with what you're seeing.
Right.
So that when you try to, if you survive it, you try to recall what happened, it's just a mess of just.
It is, yes, it is living PTSD. Like this. The other thing, which, we might get into it more, but like sometimes it's made reference to that it actually creates new creatures out of this horrific disaster. And it's just like, it's so horrible. It needs to come up with new horrible so that it can adequately be as horrible as possible. It's like, yikes, that is quite an experience.
Yeah, it really is a thing on its own level. We have one other document here called the Pocket Guide to the Empire. I've talked about this a lot, at least in the early episodes of the show. The Pocket Guide to the Empire attempts to give you a breakdown of all the different races and all the different cultures and those kinds of things. In the section where it talks about the Bosmer, at the very bottom of that section, it happens to have a part that talks about the Wild Hunt. Here's what it says. While sometimes amusing, the Bosmer have a bestial side. They're usually pretty amusing. That's the funny thing about this is the Bosmer are usually pretty friendly, like easygoing.
It is funny though, because that is such a condescending imperial way of talking about that. Right. It's like, oh, they're very amusing, but sometimes they're serious. And it's like, well, that's a very looking down at other cultures way of doing that, Imperials.
Yeah, and this is a very imperial, like we talked about last time. This is a very imperial,
it's a super imperial doctrine as is. So.
Yeah, this is from their perspective. So while sometimes amusing, the Bosmer have a bestial side. They can resort.
We're old timey British hunters.
That's what the Imperials are. They can resort to animal shapes if they need to, or water. They just turn into water, just turn into a puddle, just right there. Their most dreaded transformation is the Wild Hunt, which killed King Borgus for the iniquities of his Alessian faith. The Wild Hunt is a pack of shifting forest demons and animal gods, thousands strong, which sweeps through the countryside, killing everything in its path. The Wood Elves do not like to talk about the hunt, and I gather they do not feel proud of this power at all. Gomini, my Bosmer companion of late, tells me that the hunt is used for justice, but that also every monster in the world has ever been comes from a previous hunt. Those Bosmer that go wild, they do not return.
Reginald, fix your monocle.
Jiminy, bring me my breakfast.
Yeah. You really enjoyed our version of the Imperials.
So yeah, I guess that's my new Imperial voice. But similar, like this connects to the other stuff, gives us a little bit more detail here. Demonic animal forms, thousands strong, sweep through the countryside, killing their enemies.
Yeah, it honestly, it's definitely comes across as like, again, we've already forewarned people about the bit of the the explicit side of this with this one.
Yes.
This is very much strikes me as it's one of those things because they're not really looking for a reason to do a wild hunt. It's kind of like a oh shit button for it really is like, we are up a creek. What do? We have to invoke the wild hunt. And as a side effect, it is just carnage. And it's
often not good for them. Like this document talks about how many of them get lost to the hunts, to the transformation, never come back. And according to this, at least imperial version of the happenings, that's the origin of many of the monsters that you see across the land. These things used to be Bosmer.
It's the side effect of this, and that's one of the things that I find probably the best description of the Wild Hunt is a cannibalistic orgy.
Yeah, it's
it's really one pretty messed up thing to consider, but as a side effect of this kind of winding down from its just total chaos. And it's like, okay, well, this thing is like procreating on itself, and then it's also consuming itself, and you're getting these weird side effects of basically these monsters, like you said, that are left to the surrounding areas of Tamriel. It's not a thing that like it kind of honestly, it's so taboo that it makes sense that not even the Bosmer are like, oh yeah, we're proud of this. It's like, oh, yeah, we're really out of options.
Yeah, you can't deny that this is a thing that happens on occasion because it's documented in our history. So
right, but it's like this is really like we're we can make it topical. We're currently in the state of Twitter right now, and this is what we have to do to get ourselves out of it.
Twitter has become the Wild Hunt. Everyone's just anybody can be verified. Nobody knows what they're looking at anymore.
Yeah, everybody's devouring each other.
It's just a mess. So like the simplest form of this is, and let's sum it up a little bit. The Bosmer, according to their belief in Y'ffre, came from the ooze. They came from this primordial chaos. They were given form, but they still maintain the ability to change their form. They're not supposed to change their form unless something really terrible happens, and then all of a sudden they all decide to do that at the same time and evoke the Wild Hunt, and then they go through and destroy everything. But in doing that, they lose, not only do they lose their humanity or elfmanity.
Yeah, not humanity,
mermanity.
Yeah, whatever.
Right. They lose that, but they fall prey to their most bestial urges. So murder, rape.
Yep.
Like eating, cannibalism, like every base urge is just amplified 100 times, and they're just turned into this Sharknado of Tamriel.
They're really, it's just a blender of carnage. Like this has got to be like Sanguine's wet dream. Like is what really was like everything goes. I'm like, Sanguine is going to be so on board with this.
Right. Right.
This is the pinnacle of his domain.
Yeah. All right. So here, we're going to read some of the passages from the UESP because these are also really good as well.
Yes.
And some of the stuff we read are some of the core bits that lead to these explanations, but these explanations are fun. So the Wild Hunt, also called the Great Hunt, is a magical trait innate to all Bosmer. It is brought on by a collective ritual performed by many Bosmer, causing them to shapeshift into a horde of feral supernatural beasts. Now they have to summon this ability. They have to decide as a group that, okay, it's time to do this. This is the last stroke. We have to do this. This transformation cannot be undone. These monsters stampede, changing their form constantly. So now they don't only just pick a form, they're constantly changing form as well. Slaying and devouring all in their path, and eventually, when left with no surviving targets, turn upon themselves in a cannibalistic orgy, which you had said. This transformation is seen by the Bosmer as a return to the chaos of the Dawn era they call the Ooze, when they were unable to hold onto one shape for more than a moment. After they made the Green Pact with Y'ffre, he taught the Bosmer how to do so, and blah, 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 blah. This next passage, though, is also interesting as well. These shapeshifters are stripped of their flesh from their bone instantaneously and turned into creatures that, quote, defy all attempts to identify them. That's thus the tentacles and whatever, like claws and beaks and who knows.
Sure, why not? All of them, all of the above.
All of them at the same time. Some may not even turn into creatures at all and instead change into great wreathing tongues, unfettered by lips or teeth. That's kind of like a tentacle. A tongue is kind of like a really thick tentacle, like a little wider, and can take on a gaseous form, which makes them impossible to contain without the aid of magic. There's even some suggestions they can take on the form of water or waves of blood. Gross. Yeah. The forms they take on are not static, however, and they may appear like a serpent one moment and shift to another creature the next moment. The Bosmer invoke the Wild Hunt. It causes a change in wild animals as well. Beasts typically transform into beings that are part plant and part animal. So this explains some of those plant-like mounts that we have in ESO that look like, it looks like a kitty cat or a wolf, but it's made out of vines.
Right. The idea behind just something that's seen through many of the games, like a Spriggan type of deal.
Right. So maybe this has some relation to that. You can see why the Imperials would be like, maybe this is the origin of those types of monsters that live in the wild. Maybe they came from that because there's something similar there.
Yep.
Maybe there is. Maybe there isn't some truth to that. We don't really know. Now, the purpose of the Wild Hunts varies depending on what's actually going on. Sometimes the Bosmer need to do it in order to stand up against somebody who's taking advantage of them. They may protect their land, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to get into the 3 historic cases we have on the second half of the show of when these hunts occurred. There's also a passage here about Hircine. Hircine likes transformation, turning into monsters and things, right? So you would think maybe there's a connection there as well. Hircine is capable of creating creatures that mimic those that are created from wild hunts. He meddled with the nature of wolves, making them susceptible to shapeshifting. So maybe he was actually inspired by this to create werewolves. Potentially.
Sure.
This modification is the origin of both werewolves and the wild hunt wolf, who, as their name suggests, are wolves that have become unraveled because they have forgotten their Y'ffre taught form. This is what one of those documents was talking about, how sometimes the creatures transform, they survive the wild hunt, and then they go on to be something else. Much like creatures that got caught up in the Bosmer's wild hunt ritual, Hircine's Bloodroot Forge is also capable of creating creatures much like those in the wild hunt. So there's a little bit of a cross inspiration going on there.
Indeed. And anybody who might not know what the Bloodroot Forge is, that is a dungeon from ESO. So you can get the story from that if that's something that interests you. But yeah, they ended up turning that into a group dungeon in Elder Scrolls Online. So.
Have you done the video on that one yet?
That's actually, honestly, that's one of the ones we've got on the docket for the next batch, because now that we're going into DLC, that's coming right up. So ironically, that one will be showing up very near in the future if you're interested in the story to it.
There you go. Yeah, follow Lotus's YouTube channel if you are interested in seeing what the dungeons are like and what the stories are behind them. Because even if you play ESO, so many times you just run through the dungeon, murder everything, and then you don't even pay attention to the story. So if you want to either take the time and do it yourself, you can do that, or you can check out one of Lotus's videos.
Yeah, we just do completely no voice, just the game gives you the story. It's like watching a little mini TV show. We try to keep them as concise but fulfilling as possible.
Yeah. Well, tell you what, why don't we take a break here? We'll take our mid-break, thank our patrons, and then we're going to come back and talk about the 3 historical cases that we have some evidence about.
Yes.
This will be fun, so hang tight.
This is Hermes Morak, Dragonborn, and you are educating yourself to the Elder Scrolls Lorecast.
All right, here we are in the middle of the show. This is where we get to thank our patrons, and we have a bunch of new patrons this week who have signed up. Welcome to Nicholas F., Zachary M., Alexander S., Jonathan A., Outlander Frog. Awesome.
Hey, Outlander Frog.
Kevin B. and Scott R. So many new people signing up.
People. I just happen to know Outlander Frog because we were literally just talking, and they happened to swing by my stream like the other day. So.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love when people. Yeah, I love when people come by and they introduce themselves and like come by your stream, or sometimes I pop in your stream and I'll see people there, or sometimes they come by my stream, and that's absolutely
it's like a big community. Like that's kind of the point of all of this.
I know,
it's fun to be able to just talk about this stuff.
Totally. Yeah. And that's actually the best way to get our attention. We get messages from people all the time. Sometimes it's hard to keep up. I try to respond to private messages, but do come by our streams.
Do my best.
Yeah. Do come by our streams and say hi. And that's why we stream, is in order to hang out with our community and talk with you guys and answer questions and stuff. So that's absolutely the best way to get a hold of us. But thank you to all of you for signing up on the Patreon. That brings us to 114 patrons.
Oh my Lord.
You guys are awesome. And big shout outs to our Daedric Princes, our tier 5 patrons, Kira C and Noodle Al Dente. They get shout outs every week, and I hope our newest patrons are enjoying your ad-free episodes, the old 90 some episodes that were
pre-me episodes.
The pre-Lotus episodes are all on there. T-shirts, we've got new T-shirts that have rolled out, including a sweatshirt that should be, if you signed up at tier 4 2 months ago, next month you'll be getting it.
That sounds about right.
Sounds about right.
I really can't wait to see those, because there was that snafu, so you upgraded it for people. I'm very curious to see how those ones came out. I love a good hoodie.
Yeah. Man, I still wish I could have these, but I can't. I have to keep myself. Maybe I'll do my own designs that are different, but I'm not allowed. It's only for patrons. But thank you to everybody. And if you want to check out all the different stuff you can get, help out, support the show. We'd love your support. Patreon.com/Elder Scrolls Lorecast. There's links in the description underneath the recording, all that stuff. So go check that stuff out. And it's because of you guys that we can keep doing this. So thank you so very much. And then we don't have any new ratings or reviews, or at least new reviews to read out. We get new ratings all the time.
But we have more stars according to the thingy.
Yeah, but like we only get the actual reviews every so often.
Yeah,
so
we don't know who those are from.
Right. So if you have an Apple account, you can log into Apple Podcasts, leave us a review on there. If you give us a 5-star review with some words, we'll read it out on a future episode of the show. Otherwise, you can give us a rating on Spotify. 5 stars is wonderful. We love your support. That just lets people know, hey, the show's worth checking out. You should go check it out. And it really does help. So,
and something that I think I would speak for both of us for this, because recently people have started doing it for Tales, which we've joked that we like really appreciate, because it's just like, since not all of this is about analytics, obviously that's very helpful and we appreciate it. Several people who were like, yeah, I don't have an Apple device. So we're sending you just a review so that you know we love your show. Like, we sent you 5 stars, and we had several, including one where somebody made Ark in, like, I'll shout her out here because I know she listens to the show as well. Gwen the Bard actually drew a little mini version of Ark with the review, and it's so good. Cool. So it's like that. We always appreciate just any of you taking the time to like give us your thoughts and stuff back, because it's kind of nice to not know we're talking into a void and that you actually enjoy this.
Absolutely. Yeah. Obvious, like, clearly both our shows have lots of listeners. That we've done very well in building an audience, but it is a lot of work. We put out stuff for free, and we're putting it out there to a lot of people, and a lot of you we never even get to know or get to meet. And that's a big reason Lotus and I both do podcasts, is because of the community.
Right. And it's fun. And when you recognize me in game and send me a message, and I don't know who you are yet until I meet you, I'm like, that's so nice that you enjoy the show. I'm so glad. Like,
no, it's very cool. That's very, very cool.
It from this side of the mic, it tends to be occasionally a little overwhelming when you're like, oh, that's weird. I guess I'm not just talking to my own computer or to Tom.
Right. Yeah.
We talk to more than just me and you.
Yeah. And the best places to do that are the Discord. Join us on Discord. You can follow us on Twitter, and then also on the live stream. So that's why I live stream, is because it's a lot easier for me to make sure to get to chat with people on there than it is to try to respond to all the messages. So thanks again to everybody and all your support. Let's move on with the rest of this. We got some crazy stuff to talk about. Here we go.
You're listening to the Elder Scrolls Lorecast, dear child of cities. That is why the Night Mother loves you.
All right, Lotus, we've got what are 3 documented cases, and there may be others, but of course these are 3 that are fairly substantiated. And we have this is interesting. We have one for each of the first 3 eras of the world.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the oldest one here is from the first era, 369 in Cyrodiil, and this is very, very early on in the history of everything. A wild hunt was invoked in order to kill King Borgus, which was referenced in one of those books I read, who was a supporter of the Lessian Order and thus against Valenwood. As a result of his death via the hunt, Skyrim was plunged into a civil war that lasted more than 50 years. And this one, there's not a whole lot of reference to it, but basically this was the king was putting down the Bosmer, and my dog is now barking at me. Hey, what's going on? And
she doesn't like the wild hunt.
Yeah, and they needed to defend themselves, and so they invoked the wild hunt and it murdered the king.
I can see that bringing a lot of negative attention to a very specific group of people.
Yeah, you can see that there's, I would imagine the Imperials would be a little bit more critical of the Bosmer.
After that kind happened. Of very similar to, the story about the Morag Tong kind of being outlawed by, murdering the potentate and saying Morag Tong written in his blood on the wall didn't go over so well. Generally probably not great to just outright murder somebody in charge and expect to not have any blowback. Yeah. And this is a big deal. Like, this is the nuclear option for the Bosmer. This is like, we can't stand this anymore. Let's just drop a nuke on the king, basically, and ourselves. There are no other options
at the same time. Anybody who was involved in this.
Yeah.
So, rough stuff. The second one is from the second era, and this one's more vaguely attested to. On location unknown, the last wild hunt to be officially documented until the end of the third era. So, sometime in the late second era, there's just rumor reference among the Bosmer people of it's one of those things that they often don't want to talk about too much.
Yeah,
so it
definitely seems very taboo amongst the Bosmer. The same way they don't want to become the ooze. This, I guess, since they're shape shifting, it's kind of the same category. Like
they're not proud of it.
Yeah, exactly. It's a thing that technically exists, but if we could not really bring attention to that and pretend that doesn't really exist unless it's overtly brought up, which if we could avoid bringing it up would be great.
Yeah, let's just pretend that part of our culture and our race just doesn't really exist, because it doesn't happen that much.
Yeah, it's not a great image.
No. So that's the second era. And then in the third era, in 397, which is almost 200 years before the events of ESO, so not so far beyond that there wouldn't be people still talking about it, or even some of the longer living races still around to have attested to it having been a thing. This is in Vindisi. A wild hunt was invoked in retaliation to a Khajiit attack on the Bosmer hamlet of Vindisi by its inhabitants during a truce in the 5-Year War. The 5-Year War comes up in some of the references in ESO history and stuff.
Yeah, it's not a super... I mean, it's important, but it's not a super involved thing where it was just the Khajiit, where it involved the 10 Marshal forests and a kind of like dispute over the area.
Yeah, it was mostly between the Bosmer and the Khajiit, just
correct,
like land grab type stuff.
Yeah, little land war, and who's cutting down what trees.
Yeah, don't cut down our trees. Yeah, according to the Imperial Geographical Society, this was the most recent sighting of the wild hunt to date. So this one is, being that it was only 200 years before the current era of ESO, much more attested to, much more horrific to think that, like, if you lived during the time of ESO, and clearly that is not the most recent era, right? Some of the other games take place in the 4th era, then there's the 5th era with Skyrim. Time goes on since ESO. So ESO is at this like middle place in history. But even in playing ESO, you're walking around, everybody feels like, oh, we're the modern people. We are the established modern people. This is what modern people do.
Objectively a prequel, essentially, to the entire series of numbered games.
Yes. But in their perspective, from they're at the furthest extent of their cultural development, of history, of all of that. And to be able to say, yeah, within the last 200 years, we experienced one of these, like this was a real thing. Like, that's pretty nuts.
Yeah.
What you got? I see we're getting comments.
It's funny. There are, to be fair, most wars are actually land grabs, and I was like, that's very on brand.
Yeah, true.
Land grabs are resource grabs.
Right. So those are the three that are attested to the most, and because this one does occur within living memory of a period that we have in the games, it means that it's a lot more likely to be legitimate, right? Like, maybe it's not as crazy as we think it is, but we talk about this on occasion, how sometimes things are brought up in the histories or the lore or the myth of a thing, and you're like, well, is it real? Is it not? Is this an unreliable narrator thing? Is it just a very specific culture's perspective on it that's different from another culture?
Of something that's maybe not quite as extreme as it's portrayed throughout history, as each version of the story becomes more involved than the previous version of the story. A bizarre reference, but I guess it'll date myself for anybody of our age demographic. To anybody who watches The Simpsons, there was a really old thing where they were trying to have like a school revolt thing, and they were passing along a message along the line, and it was like, it was a teacher's strike, and it was like, teachers will crack any minute, and it's passed down the line, and by the time it gets to the final one, it's the teachers will crack any minute, purple monkey dishwasher, which had nothing to do with anything originally said whatsoever.
Telephone, right.
And it was just like, exactly that game of telephone. It's like, well, what was the original event, and what is the myth behind the event itself? Because sometimes the myth ends up being more impressive or terrifying, even though that wasn't even what happened.
Yeah, well, things get inflated,
much more grounded.
Absolutely, and either by mistake or intentionally, and told in a very specific way for some sort of personal gain or whatever. And
political
people
reasoning,
embellish. This is like, you talk to any historian, and this is a large portion of their job is to go, okay, what actually happened here? Like, if you look at documentaries, or if you read history books of specific events that happened like in the ancient world, like the numbers are ridiculous. Like, the Assyrians brought 200,000 men to the fray or whatever. And it's like, the Assyrians didn't have 200,000 people in the land that they owned. And they're like, maybe they brought 20,000. Like right. There's this embellishment thing that happens. What's so crazy about this stuff is that the third time this happened, it was within living memory of some of the individuals.
Exactly. And ironically enough, it's something we haven't gone into a lot with the Bosmer, but their way of keeping history is the spinners, which they spin stories, which they can also, I mean, it gets into the magical aspect where they can literally kind of spin reality to a degree. But interestingly enough, you can spin history if you're the surviving member of it. Yeah. It's like it is. So that's again where things can take a different turn from where they're actually started, and you can sort of spin them into a form that it's like, okay, well, we need this to sound more impressive, or we need them to sound not so noble, whatever the
not
case
so
may
dangerous
be.
Not so much like a Sharknado.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay. So when it comes to the Wild Hunt, how accurate do you think our descriptions are? Being that we have a relatively close to actual events of a game experience of the event.
So I think this is the point where I can bring up the fact that there is, as we mentioned, these are a lot of books. These are a lot of references in games and stuff like that through dialogue. There is a weird dream sequence. It's kind of like a what if scenario that happens in the Aldmeri Dominion storyline of Elder Scrolls Online, where you kind of experience like if Queen Aren gets essentially shanked and left in like a ditch to die, and like the Aldmeri Dominion falls on itself, and all these horrible things happen. The Veiled Inheritance takes over. All these things when you're playing through the Aldmeri Dominion. What's the worst case scenario for them? And that's supposed to inspire you to like try to fix this. Well, during all of this, you experience a version of the Wild Hunt. And I don't want to sound super dismissive, but it's not that impressive. it's now.
What do you see? What do you see specifically?
So that's exactly it. So what you actually see is you are on this like foggy hamlet of land where you can see one of the really impressive Bosmer tree cities like off in the distance, very impressive looking. And through the fog, things come out of it, and the fog kind of closes in, and these just creatures come at you.
Like a Sharknado with those shark heads popping out.
Exactly, except instead it's werewolves and vampires and werebats that you've already seen 1,000 times in the game before.
Not tentacle monsters and blood blobs and
no, it doesn't really get that weird. It's just here are some things that go bump in the night essentially, and you kill them and you progress forward, and it's just like you hear screams and stuff like that in the distance, and it's not this horrific whirlwind of nightmares. It's more of there's some messed up stuff happening, and there's a lot of Bosmer being killed and other people being killed and all this stuff, and the Dominion's falling apart because this is basically that oh shit button moment where everything went south, and this was the only alternative because there was no escape. Like this was it.
Right. This is what we will have to do if it gets to this point. So,
right.
So I have a few variations on what could explain that. One,
yes.
Maybe it's the truth. Maybe the Wild Hunt doesn't look as weird as we think it does, but it's still terrifying and terrible.
Sure, I was going to say, but it's still wiping people out left and right.
Right. It isn't turning it up to 11 like we discussed, and maybe it's turning up to 7 instead, right? So maybe it's that. 2, maybe the tail spinners are trying to paint it in a way that isn't as horrific for you, the viewer, as it would actually be.
Because it's not a thing you experience. This is a possible reality you kind of dream about.
3, maybe it is worse, but nobody knows exactly what it looks like. And so they're just painting you a picture that they think
the best they can do.
This is what it is.
It's pretty scary, right? Like look at all these dead people, and there's werewolves coming out of the mist and stuff like that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Terrifying. Terrible stuff. We don't want this to happen, right? or maybe it's just a limitation of the game engine.
I was going to say, or 4, there's only so much you can do with the limitations of technology in a game.
Right. So what do you think the actual truth of it is?
So maybe this is because I'm very like game focused oriented when I play things. I feel like maybe it's just that I want it to be. I feel like the only versions that we've seen and stuff like that are limitations technically, as opposed to, I actually really like the idea of this thing just being this horrific nightmare tornado in the world. It's just like, it does not happen that often. It should not happen that often, because it's going to be problematic for everybody involved. But I like the fact that as a series, it has a very broad appeal, and there's some really unsavory stuff that's on the outskirts of the game.
Yeah.
It's not all dark all the time. Closest reference I can always give is Game of Thrones. I'm like, man, why do you even want to be alive in this world? This is awful.
Right.
Whereas this is like a good mix of the two, but it doesn't remove the unsavory parts that you're not meant to like. You're not meant to enjoy it. It's not supposed to be something you latch onto and like, oh, the creation of vampires is good. No, that's supposed to be unpleasant.
It's supposed to be horrifying. Yeah.
It's supposed to like repulse you. And like, I like the idea that there's this potential just like ooze-based problem that like the Bosmer really as a culture don't deal with most of their lives. Like, and they exist totally outside this. But if things ever get too far out of hand, it's their really last ditch effort to fix the problem or potentially just kind of redirect the problem, because I don't know how much the Wild Hunt ever fixes so much as redirects in just a different area.
I think that this is in some ways kind of like a Dragon Break, in that it's hard to explain it after the fact.
Sure, I could see that.
So, like, obviously they're two very different things. They're on very different levels. But when, like, the idea that creatures reverting to a primordial state where the shape and even the nature of them is constantly changing and evolving, I think is one of those things that is fundamentally difficult for the mind to comprehend.
Yes.
And so even when you see
it's so horrible, you shouldn't really even want to fully wrap your head around it.
Right.
Like
even when you see this,
that's not even really a goal.
And it's not just like watching like one person morph uncontrollably in front of you. This is a mass of hundreds or thousands of individuals, all ravaging the countryside, all morphing all at the same time. You can't even figure out where one starts and one ends. And it's the kind of thing where you can't actually figure out what it is you're seeing, and so your brain struggles to do so. Similar to working yourself through a dragon break, and then you getting on the other side of the dragon break and going, well, this is what happened to me. Wait, well, how come reality doesn't reflect this? Like, what is going on here? Like, you can't really figure out how to justify everything after the fact. So to represent that in any way would be very difficult. Even for somebody who's trying to, like, from an inside lore perspective, somebody who's trying to give you a vision of what this would actually look like can't even approach that. There's just no way to do so.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I agree with you.
Yeah. So I think maybe it's somewhere in that category, because we do know there are great and powerful forces in this world. There are terrible things that happen, and there are some things that are just beyond explanation. And I think this is just one of those things that anytime we try to see it is never going to be actually what it looks like. It's always going to be approximating something. So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah. And something actually Billy just brought up in chat, which I feel is kind of good, is so how do you beat it when
you don't
activate
you just avoid it? You try to you can't fight it at all.
It's essentially you outlast it. Like, right. It has a shelf life. Like
it's like a tornado. You get out of the way, you get out of the path of the tornado. Eventually the tornado will wear itself out.
Correct.
Or will break apart.
Just destroy as much as possible and make sure you're not one of the destroyed.
But it's like an act of nature is what it is. Yeah.
But there is no real stopping it so much as just outlasting.
You don't fight it. There's nothing to fight. It'd be like fighting a hurricane. Like
you'll just get swept up into it.
Yeah,
as
you can't
opposed
fight
to
a hurricane.
Doing anything against it.
Right. Yeah, so that's
a
question.
really good question. That's like a really good point, because it's like there isn't really anything to do. You just let it play itself out, which is why you don't want this to constantly be a thing. It needs to be a rare event, because you have too many of these and there's nothing left.
Yeah, and it's as destructive to the Bosmer as it is their enemies. That's why it's a last resort.
It wipes out those involved. It's not like they come out better for the situation. They're gone.
No. And potentially new monsters are now roaming around in the world. So.
Right. And things could theoretically be worse as a result.
Right. So anyway, that's it for this episode. I think you guys get the picture as best as we can paint it. Another fun idea, Lotus. I'm glad you brought up these last two ideas. And
these ones are just, I don't know. They seem like they're more tangentially referred to, but never really covered. So it seemed like it'd be fun to just kind of dive into like, this is some weird stuff.
Yeah, Well, we like the weird stuff. We did that weird, 2 summers ago. We did that series of weird and wacky things.
And this never came up. It's like, wait, how has this really not been covered? And even other lore-based things, this doesn't seem to be, at least in anything that I've found, covered too much. It's just kind of referred to. And it's like, well, there's a decent amount to this.
Yeah. Well, we're going to wrap this up. Just a reminder, if you are joining us for the end of the month patron chat, fortunately, the Thursday 2 weeks from now, or is unfortunately, that's Thanksgiving, isn't it? The 24th. Unfortunately, the 24th is Thanksgiving. We might want to push this. Lotus, I don't know if it works for you, but we might want to push this to the 25th. No, the 25th is I've got another show. Maybe do it a day early, the 23rd.
Yeah, why
don't our patrons, you guys who are listening to this, chime in, shoot us some notes on Discord. Let us know if you'd rather do it a day early, or maybe we just push it to the 1st. That's just one day past the end of the month. That might be the best way to do it. So we'll figure something out. We might have to take a day off for Thanksgiving or whatever, because it is kind of a busy week with all that stuff.
Oh yeah, with family and friends and all of that stuff.
So maybe we'll do it on the 1st. Let's shoot for the 1st. Let us know if that, because that's the regular night. It should work for most people. So that's what we got. Anything going on with you want to share before we head out?
No, I was going to say tales as usual. Actually, I'm not entirely sure. We had we recorded earlier this week, and then Ark was editing the episode, but then there was back to behind the scenes stuff. It didn't upload as quickly, so hopefully it'll be on your feed somewhat soon. If not already, it might already be there. Actually, we're just kind of waiting for it. And otherwise, I'm hoping that I can stream more Daggerfall somewhat soon, because I've had great feedback on everybody who's been enjoying either joining me for the live streams, which we had mentioned earlier that the reason we stream is because it's kind of fun to hang out with everybody. And
we're not going to be big streamers. We're not going to be big streamers.
This is not my surprise. This is not my job. But it's been a lot of fun. It actually makes it a lot easier to play these games. Ironically, I've been enjoying Daggerfall quite a bit. It's been a lot of fun. But after we've had 3 sessions of Daggerfall so far, and everybody's been super, super nice coming to hang out to watch me either fail or succeed or nudge me just enough in the right direction so that I continue. One of the things that I just, it's a game from 1996, if I'm
6 or
7.
Yeah.
I don't know off the top of my head. I've been told that so far, all 3 sessions, I've been the #1 Daggerfall streamer.
Oh, probably because there's
category.
Well, there's also probably 3, maybe 4 people streaming.
It's so funny. I joked because one of the ones after I was told that last time, I looked it up and there were 57 people who had looked at the thing recently, and I looked at it and 52 of them were in my stream.
Yeah.
So I was like, but even still, the fact that anybody comes out while I do this stuff is just. That's greatly appreciated. It makes it much more entertaining while I blunder around and try to figure out what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. So I like to joke that I'm like the king of the games that nobody plays. Yeah, because it was Arena, Battlespire, and now we got Daggerfall. So this is honestly the most fun of the classic games I've had so far. I'm still kind of blundering around, but it's fun.
It's fun. It's fun.
I understand. This is the first Elder Scrolls game that I understand kind of roped so many people in. It's so involved.
Right. It's the first one where you can really role play a character in a world and just go do stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. That totally makes sense. Well, go check out Lotus's streams, Lotus of Doom on Twitch.
Hopefully more coming soon.
Yeah. Go check out my streams. I've been playing really weird Skyrim VR mods. And throwing children.
Some of the throwing children thing.
All sorts of weird stuff.
All I remember from one of the videos that I saw that you had posted was somebody was trying to give you directions and you grabbed them by the face and threw them into like a cow. And I was like, what is happening?
Yeah, I'll be like talking to I'm talking to the character, not using the in-game dialogue. So I'm like the old man bard guy that I have follow me around is one of these like mod companions, and I'll be like, old man, listen, this is what we're gonna go do next. And I'm like talking to the old man, and then of course, just like any Skyrim character, somebody walks by and just starts talking to you to the side of your face, and I'm like, go on, just throw him. Yeah, it's just like, get out.
I just remember you did the VR grab, throw, and they like hit a cow or a horse or something off to the side. I was like, perfect, prime real estate video.
Oh, so fun. Yeah, so come hang out with me. Twitch.tv/robotsradio, or the new Robots Radio funny stuff on YouTube channels where all that stuff's going. So if you want to go check that stuff out. But that's what we got this week. We'll be back next week. I'm sure we'll come up with something crazy to talk about. We don't have it planned yet, but we'll figure it out. And thank you for being here. Chat, thank you for being here. And everybody listening, so much. Thank you so much for the support. All right, let's get going. See you guys later.
Have a good one.
Thanks for joining us. We'd love to hear from you. You can reach me on Twitter at robots_radio or Lotus of Doom at Lotus of Doom. Also, you can join us on the Robots Radio Discord channel. You can easily just search Robots Radio Discord on Google or check the description underneath the podcast. Also, this podcast is recorded live every week on Thursday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific on the Robots Radio channels on Twitch, YouTube, and on Facebook. So just search Robots Radio on any of those platforms. Come join us. We'd love to chat with you while we record the show, or before or after. Either way, just come hang out with us. And if you're looking for more information about my shows and the shows on the Robots Radio Network, go to robotsradio.net for all the information about all the shows on the network, including the Robots Radio Rocket Club, where I help both new and existing podcasters to grow their shows, build their audiences, and create the best podcasts they possibly can. All of that at robotsradio.net. We'll see you next time.